reproductive rights are under assault in the United States. And what's worse, the rationale put forth by the Supreme Court to justify rolling back nearly 50 years of precedent that there's no implicit right to privacy in the Constitution lays the groundwork for a full court press on a host of other settled cases. Deep Listens is taking action, and we need your help. Of course, we want you to learn about the elected officials in your area and vote in every single election, but we'd like you to consider contributing to the national network of abortion funds as well. The NNAB is a clearinghouse of regional abortion and reproductive health organizations across the United States. Their goal is to remove financial and logistical barriers to abortion access, centering on those looking for assistance and organizing at the intersection of racial, economic, and reproductive justice. You can contribute to the NNAB directly at abortionfunds.org/donate. You can also use their site to locate an abortion fund in your area so you can keep your money local and aid your neighbors. Thank you, and now back to your regularly scheduled podcast. Hello, good people. Welcome to Off the Deep End, a Deep Listens podcast where we explore role-playing video games in depth. That's the joke. My name is Jeff Rude, the host and the Planet Pizza in Minot, North Dakota of this operation. Joining me, as always, with the erstwhile game world coming to you big time live from Idaho Falls, it's Braden, Arbitrary Water Redacted. Hello, Braden.
Hello. If you pay $20, you can play as much as you want for an hour.
I'll take that bet. Also joining us from the celebrated Bay Area attraction, the Namco Timeout Arcade, it is Chris. Zombie Pie, Redacted. Chris, are you in a public park? What's
No. Can you hear things in the public park?
Yes.
Yeah. Public park. Give me a minute. I think I forgot to close my window.
There you go. That sounds...
Bork.
It's okay. We'll just leave this in. This is good. This is good material.
This is content.
Yeah. You can't be burning pod, as they say, when they talk to each other, because that is a thing normal kids say to each other now.
Is it better now?
Yeah. We can't hear the raucous elementary school in your apartment anymore. And that's good.
No, I live next to a park. It happens. What are you going to do? Kids need to play.
That's horseshit, and you know it. They should be playing at arcades, which is what we're actually going to be talking about this episode.
Well, Jeff, I'm glad that you're making references to arcades because unlike you two, I didn't fall down the college money pit. I'm glad to say that I'm the only person in the Deep Listens network with no student loans or college debt, bitches. Capitalism actually good. Yo. Bah, 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 bah.
Yeah, that was worth it. God, I'm really mean to you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be mean to you.
I just made fun of your debt. Thanks, Biden.
You know what? Never mind. Go fuck yourself.
The interest rate for this semester's loan was higher.
Again, thanks, Joe Biden.
I don't even want to tell you what I got this house at. Tell you what, I'm never moving out of this house, though. Not anymore. Cut my head off with a big knife. Hey, so fans, listeners, here's the breaks. We were going to talk about Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura. Let's say the part 2, wrap up the rest of that game, put it on the board, and then life happened. Kind of at all three of us. Well, actually, it kind of applies to all three of us. School started, and let me tell you, I've been really busy and really fucking tired. Like, every day. I can only speak for myself in this matter. However, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm actually speaking for all of us.
Yeah, tiredness, that's a thing. I've just been, coming to work and just falling asleep in my chair. I think that I don't know if this is Braden's secret tip. I think one of the reasons why I'm starting to get into weekday streaming is that it requires me to stay awake, at least, conscious. Otherwise, I will just fall asleep on a couch or on my bed.
Okay. See, what I do is I inevitably drink too much caffeine because I go to the Dutch Bros or the Starbucks, and the very nice teenagers working there are very confused when I ask for the sugar-free fake Red Bull. And then I can't sleep. And then I'm stuck being like, well, if I take a melatonin, I'm going to sleep in late. And then it turns out I can't fall asleep. And then I fall asleep at 3 a.m. and I still sleep in late.
Okay, I have two coffee-related things, I guess. This goes for really both of you. So there's a Pacific Northwest thing, and they've trickled into NorCal based on my travels there, of these little coffee stands you drive up to and get your coffee in, which is like, yeah, no shit, Starbucks. Like, no, these are different. This is like they went to a Lowe's, bought a garden shed, put some like R13 insulation on it, maybe, and rented space in a parking lot of another pre-existing business and sell coffee out of those. Up here, where I live, in Oregon, they have these as well. Some of them are naughty, where you go... I'll confess, I've used one of them one time, and I'll be honest, it was by accident. I needed coffee, and there's one down basically in a public park where I used to live, and I was like, I just need dank coffee.
Did they put THC products in the coffee?
No, it's not naughty like that. I got up to this place, and it was called Ladybug, and I was just like, oh, cute, Ladybug, whatever. I just need coffee, could give a fuck. And I noticed the window is like... what's the word? It's got some sort of opaque film on it, and I'm like, why would you...
Okay, it's a tinted window.
Yeah, and then I did the math just as this window's opening, and there's a gal who's probably at that point maybe 10 years younger than me at that point, in about 3 or 4 square inches of fabric, who greets me, and I'm like, oh, god damn it, okay. I was like, she's like, what can I get you? Does her bit. And I'm just like, all right, she's just working. I'm just working. I'm just like like an Americano. She's like, sure, coming right up. And I think she kind of gets that, like, no, I'm really just here for coffee. I don't need like a performance. But she makes this coffee, makes it there, pulls espresso, etc. She's just like, cool. Yeah. All right. And she's like, all right, that'll be $10.
Jesus Christ.
And I was like, oh, that's how this works. Okay. This is how you get paid. Okay. And then you just have, when the wife looks at your debit card and sees $10 charged at a coffee stand, you just go, oh, I don't know, shucks, is just a kind of good latte. And what you really did was pay a sex worker to titillate you briefly. So that's unique. That I ain't never seen those before I moved up here.
Okay.
And there's like one in like every neighborhood, basically.
Oh, wow, Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay. See, the worst that happens to me is just, once again, the overly enthusiastic teenager is just like, do you have any cool plans this weekend? And I'm like, no.
Okay, but what if they were like real enthusiastic?
Oh, yeah, no, they scare me. I want to steal their youth, drain it from them, and then I won't need to pay fucking $5 for an energy drink or a pumpkin spice latte because I'm a white person.
Speaking of other coffee things and white stuff, have you guys... Well, that sounded bad. Have you fucked around with white coffee?
I've heard of it.
No, I don't even know what this is. I was going to say the only thing I order from Dutch Bros is a slush, red or blue. So for me, I just view it as like a glorified Slurpee machine station.
Wait, you just get the slush? You don't get like the energy drink slush?
I don't get the energy drink slush because I don't like energy drinks. I just buy, the electric berry.
Okay, yeah.
So coffee, I like coffee. Been drinking it since I was, 10 because I was Lutheran when I was growing up. Roasting coffee.
I don't understand the connection between Lutheranism and coffee.
Let's explain Protestantism.
It's functionally a third sacrament, basically, of like after a Lutheran service, you go out and there's a big urn, if not two, of coffee of remedial quality and generally also donuts. For the fellowship out there in the narthex and the fellowship hall, we all get together and have the coffee and the donuts, and it's a whole thing. But anyway, so I've been drinking coffee since I was probably, frankly, too young to drink coffee.
See, when I was raised, in the faith I was raised in, we had fellowship in our perceived sense of superiority for not drinking coffee.
lots of different ways to go through the world, and man, the caffeine and the LDS. It's a fun tale for another time. Actually, it's germane to this because white coffee, roasting coffee burns off caffeine. Some of that caffeine goes bye-bye when you take coffee beans, which are seeds from a cherry-looking plant, and roast them and make them taste good. So if you want the maximum caffeinated coffee experience, what you want to do is have that coffee damn near raw, very lightly toasted. So there's like blonde roasts that you'll see, and that's just coffee that's roasted to not, your glossy black. It's just kind of like lightly done. White coffee is like lighter than that. It's like they knocked the horns off and wiped its ass, and they walked it across the fire, and that was it. Like it's very lightly done, and it does not taste particularly pleasant. However, what the move is, you make a latte or some other concoction, and then you just incorporate some of this white coffee in there. And when I was in grad school, I had, I think, basically an actual caffeine problem for about a year or so, where I was doing like 3 of those a day. I have, let's say, some very close friends who have dabbled in a mystic plant from the distant Peruvian Andes. And they have said white coffee is the closest that you could come legally to having that experience at a high enough dose. You will the whole world will slow down for you, because you will be going that fast. So if you need to get something done.
I think the only time I've gotten that close with caffeine was the time I've told Braden this story multiple times, was when I had my Four Loko pre-ban experience.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, pre-ban Four Loko. Some people have a safe environment where they drank pre-ban Four Loko, and others, like me, end up in a Walmart parking lot ripping off their T-shirt, wondering where their shoes are, and end up on a stop sign screaming at people driving past them, and then need their friends to put them in a car and take them home.
My brother has lived a fuller, more interesting life than I am. He said one time he woke up in Colorado in his truck and he just had one sock on. Yeah. And he lived in Dallas, Texas at the time. So anyway, hey, consume substances responsibly, folks, and do it with a friend.
So video games, off the deep end. We had things happen, and we're doing a filler episode for this month. We will actually come back to Arcanum. We're gonna wrap that shit up. I think. We'll get back to Arcanum. We'll get to back Arcanum.
We want to give it its due. But in the meantime,
give it its flowers.
It's a large game.
Is it large or tall?
The great Civ debate.
Does it have girth?
They started a new Civ Battle Royal, by the way, and very exciting to watch the first 10 turns of another one of those go, to see how robots play Civ. Are either of you familiar with this dumb thing?
Yes.
They're incredible.
It's basically, yeah. The reason why I know this is how tier rankings for civilizations in the Civ competitive scene are determined. Is they just pit them against very similar to how they do Street Fighter. Is they pit the AIs with equal resources against each other. And it's interesting.
I did the narration for one of the Mark II episodes. It was back when it was a long time. I actually don't even remember what happened on the episode now. I'm gonna have to go dig out my notes, but I was really, really kind of involved in that shit for a while, and I think they peaked in popularity some time ago, but new ones started. If you want to get in on the ground floor and watch those, they're really fun. Civ Battle Royal. It's a subreddit. You should go to Reddit. Said the worst people in your life. We want to talk about some arcade experiences. So what did this actually tumble out of?
They're kind of dead in the United States, but
we
all remember them when they were a fixture in our childhood.
I mean,
seedy basement in your mall, or a place where your parents would just drop you off and treat as daycare.
See, I very much grew up right as arcades were basically dead. So all of my arcade experiences are just awkward birthday parties.
Yeah, I never lived in a town growing up. I lived outside of Minot, North Dakota, and then Abilene, Texas. either 10 or 30 miles out of any of those, respectively. So going to an arcade was like, it wasn't just like, yeah, it's after school, we're going to go to the arcade. It's like, oh, yeah, we had to go to town, and while we were there, we won an argument to go to the mall or the Mr. Gaddy's Pizza and got to use the arcade facilities while we were there, or a school function. So they were kind of a exotic thing for me, even at the time. But this would have been, through the 90s, basically, for Mauricio. It was kind of the downslope. It was like the post-Daytona wave of arcade stuff. And I was never, a fighting game kid. So all of my, like, fighting game lore and, like, how those revitalized arcades to an extent, that's all kind of post-facto knowledge for me. Was not a thing I experienced.
I remember when people were spreading rumors about Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3. It's like, hey, you can unlock this character if you do this fatality at this point in this map, and then you'll unlock fucking Chameleon or something like that.
Ermac and
Rain.
The thing that I remember was I was young enough to where I wasn't able to play it, but I remember there was like hushed tones whenever talk of the game was being like discussed. Was the arcade release of Mortal Kombat 4. And everyone was super excited, and it's like, oh man, they're gonna make Mortal Kombat and it's gonna be 3D, it's gonna kill Street Fighter. And then the game came out and it was total garbage, just an absolute disappointing bullshit game.
And then as it turns out, Street Fighter killed Street Fighter just fine.
I mean,
Third Strike is fucking great.
They did the right move by making a game for, like, the most perverse people that were still playing Street Fighter, but it also...
I think that you're wrong, Jeff. I think that where things started to get really weird was, like, Street Fighter EX, and, like, Alpha 3 was also an inflection point, because Alpha 3, I think, was the clearest example of Alpha 2 is clearly better, guys. Alpha 2 is clearly better. Why are we moving forward? And then that was the point for me when it's like, oh,
that is a debated point.
The fighting game community only moves forward. They never go back unless you're Smash, but fuck those people.
Reprobate people.
But I always felt like it was Street Fighter EX and the Arika partnership was for me when I feel like Street Fighter was at its absolute lowest point. And say what you will about Street Fighter 5 and the launch of that game, but it was not as low as when Capcom was literally contracting shit to Arika.
I mean, Alpha and EX came out around the same time.
But man, EX3, that's a bad fucking video game.
Capcom Fighting
I respect
Evolution.
Arika. They make fucking bananas Tetris games.
That Skullomania. Anyway.
That Skullo Dream.
Why are we talking about arcade games? So, Arcanum, it's big. We should... one of the things I was thinking about doing is, like, what if we covered, like, really small RPGs? What if we looked at smaller games, like, in general? And in sort of mentally exercising around this idea, I was like, what are, like, the smallest RPG experiences you could have? Like, what's the simplest, briefest way you could, like, get some of that RPG flavor? And as it happens, we have bounced around 2 of these games kind of off and on since we started talking about this project, but somewhat as piss takes. And I've been watching a couple YouTube series on other arcade stuff, and it led me to stumble across the third game that's going to round out this trio, and we're going to chew on all of these. We can get away with that because each one of these is a nugget, a little guy, and doesn't require, a combined 8 hours of podcast to talk about. You can really get everything you want to know about these down in 20 minutes or so, I think, if you're really concise. So we got 3 of them, and I'm gonna run them down. If you'd like. Would you
tell me what we played, Jeff?
What did I play, Jeff? Who am I? What is my name? What games did I play for this podcast?
Okay, you're Chris, Zombie Pie Redacted.
You're Jeff.
Oh?
We're all Jeff.
Oh, I'm Jeff.
We're all big.
Jeff.
Okay, I'm Jeff now.
A big erogenous cloud.
Guys, I made a Yule.
Hell yeah.
A Yule.
Oh God. It's a poisoned word because I'm playing Lightning Returns. It's like the Pee Wee Herman thing. Like, he said Yule! He said Yule! We are going to talk about 3 games. We're going to talk about The Tower of Druaga, We're going to talk about Gauntlet, and we're going to talk about The Super Spy.
One of these things is not
The Super
like the
Spy.
other.
The Super Spy.
These things does not belong.
To finish the formal intro of this show, I suppose, if you'd like to be a part of pre-show discussions about these games, as well as really any game that you want to talk about, period, up to and including basketball, a game that is not a video game, you can join a Patreon at patreon.com/deeplistens, doing that at any dollar amount. But we'd prefer the 2, because let's be honest, 2 is a good round number, and it's still prime. That'll get you access, as we mentioned, to this Discord. It will allow you to add a game to the RPG slush pile list from which we will continue to draw as we go forward, hurtling through space and time. And that's all it gets you. Well, sure, it gives you something more at some point, I would imagine. You can also send questions to us in that Discord, or you can do that by electronic mail. You can send those to inquiries@deep.lol. That is inquiries@deep.lol. Let's kick things off talking about, let's go chronological order and start with Druaga no To. That is the Tower of Druaga. This was originally developed by Namco and published by Namco for the Namco Super Pac-Man arcade board that ran Super Pac-Man, a sucky game.
Hell yeah.
It was released in June 1984 in Japan. It was subsequently released and or converted to the MSX, the Famicom, the Fujitsu FM7, the Game Boy, the PC Engine, the Sharp X1, and then compiled at least half a dozen times, probably closer to a dozen at this point. Wow. So I just recorded an episode at Hardcore Gaming 101 about the Tower of Druaga, so I have quite a bit of details about this game rolling around in my head. I could talk a little bit about its creation. I could talk about the brain behind it. Talk about why it is the way it is. I could talk about why I have a really, really weak, I suppose, defense for this game and what it does. But the thing you should know about the Tower of Druaga before we even really get started is it is maybe the most hateful game ever made.
Not fun. I guess we could say we could create a category called meanest video game, and Tower of Druaga might actually be Zelda 2.
Put this in the group chat. I said, oh, this game is Pac-Man, but ass.
I know that Jeff will kind of talk about it, but my research kind of led me to believe that this is a weird chimera beast of a video game because it has the Super Pac-Man arcade hardware. It uses horizontal scrolling, which came from Mappy. It has the designer of Xevious, and it was conceived, I believe the quote was, Fantasy Pac-Man. So it's got all this weird different parts and pieces that Capcom had in their playbook, and they put all of the pieces together, and this popped out. And it falls into this very weird category of video games where I don't know if they ever made a game in this franchise, in this style, that I personally ever enjoyed. But it's in the same category as Heidelide, where I don't know if they ever made a good game in this franchise, but they're all kind of super important.
Yeah, Heidelide's a good one to bring up. So, the hardware foibles notwithstanding, it's not really worth getting too hung up on them, except to say, Namco, at this point, it was kind of regular for arcade players that were above a certain bar, were constantly iterating on, like, hardware stuff. So that was a board that was in use for about 2 years and was like recycled out for, I don't even remember what everything was based off of really after Super Pac-Man, but it was Pac-Land, actually, I know for a fact, which had even worse music, but I don't want to get too dug in. Pac-Man is a very influential game, and this has some Pac-Man DNA, but it also has, perhaps even more importantly, Xevious DNA, which is why we have to talk about Masanobu Endo. So, Masanobu Endo is the Xevious man. He is also the Druaga man. He is also the Macross Scramble. Yeah, God, he made a damn Famicom game in like 1986. It was the first thing he made when he left.
I know this one. It's
Hot Scramble.
Gorbda. No. It's Z Gundam Hot Scramble.
Yes, it is Hot Scramble, which is a weird multimodal game, and it's kind of cool. In terms of RPG stuff, Endo actually made Air's Adventure for the Sega Saturn much later in his career, in Saturn times. So this guy was in video games for quite a while. But his most famous stuff was definitely with Namco, and depending on your tolerance for shit and the kind of stuff you like and kind of where you're from, that will either be Xevious or this. So the thing about Xevious is it's a very influential shooter. You know, it's a vertical scrolling shooter, and it's in some sense as far from something like Drug as you can get. But the connective tissue that's there is hidden bullshit. So playing Xevious is kind of innovative for two main reasons. One, it, for lack of a better word, has AI that responds to how good you're playing. So if you are being very effective with your shots and good at taking down enemies, the game's going to throw more shit at you as you go along. So adaptive difficulty stuff. And that led to, all sorts of skill ceiling levels getting higher and higher. Also, very good Famicom port. But there's also the part of Xevious where if you're actually playing it, what you're doing is, yes, you're shooting stuff and flying a little ship around. But you're also looking for random little spots on the map where your targeting reticle for your bombs is turning red from its usual blue, which means there's a hidden tower there, a soul tower. And knowing where all of those are located is the key to getting very, very high score shit, to kind of oversimplify things. Anyway, Xevious was very successful in Japan, and the real dorks who knew got into oh, you know where all the soul towers are? It was like a way to stunt on people. And this was a very popular part of this game. Endo, for his part, made a lot of money off the back of Xevious being a successful game. He took some of that money and acquired an Apple II, a copy of Wizardry, and some of the D&D handbooks from a trip in the United States.
Yeah, he went to a business trip to the United States where they were in discussions to selling. Xevious was also a huge financial success story for Namco outside of Japan.
Yeah.
It was an unprecedented success story for Namco. They had only been a domestic supplier of arcade games, and this was their first big break in the U.S. field.
Well, Pac-Man.
Yeah, also Pac-Man. But people also forget that the Famicom port of Xevious was considered a killer app in Japan. And people kind of sort of knew Mario, but the arcade release of Mario was not as big as Xevious. But yeah, he apparently during a business trip where they're trying to sell, arcades for Namco, came into contact with, I don't even know what the timeline. It must have been AD&D. What do you think, Braden? This is.
If it was if it was mid 80s, it would have been AD&D.
Yeah, it would have been AD&D. But yeah, he came into contact and was like, "What if we made a fantasy Pac-Man?"
A fantasy Pac-Man.
With this is something we're going to talk about forever on this podcast. Is, hey, guess what? AD&D and Wizardry, very big in Japan.
Yes.
Perhaps you've heard of Record of Lodos War, a series of light novels based on a D&D campaign that was then turned into an anime. And now there's a Metroidvania.
It's a lot. It's a lot tumbled out of D&D. And I guess this is added to the pile.
I don't know how much, Jeff, you kind of looked into it, but from what I heard, and I don't know how much of this is actual apocrypha, but apparently Endo had multiple builds of this game and just reached the end point to an original build of Tower Draga, trashed it, and then restarted with a second prototype.
That would kind of make... He seems like a really exacting guy. To tell you, the layers of shit in this game, there was probably a lot of iteration. What that iteration led to is, I guess, what we really need to debate here, I guess, such that we must debate it. So, what do you do all day? What's going on? So, things this arcade game does. It's an arcade game where you explore a maze. It is unique in that it has a story. There's a plot roll that happens. That kind of comes up on the screen, which was kind of a new thing at the time. Most arcade games didn't bother to tell you the story. But yes, you are Gilgamesh, a knight rescuing a princess whose name is... Do you know the princess's name? Do you know? It's Kai. It's
Ishtar.
Kai.
Oh, wait.
It's spelled Ki.
That was Ishtar.
It's spelled Ki, but it's actually just pronounced Kai, which is really insane because we're talking about Japan, but it's true. From a nightmare creature called Druaga who lives in the top of a big scary tower. That's what you were doing. Which isn't totally germane. It's just insane that this princess's name is Kai and it's spelled Ki everywhere. Will trip your ass up. What do you do in Druaga? You are a little guy in a maze, a Pac-Man-esque maze, but it looks, dungeony with like bricks and shit. Your goal is to maneuver through this maze, find a key, and then use this key on a door that appeared while being harried by various fantasy creatures. Your slimes, your wizards, etc. Sounds okay so far, right? Now, what if I told you that it's not okay? Because what this game actually went way too hard in the direction of, frankly, is the riddles, is the puzzle bullshit. So, every single level in this dungeon, of which there are 60, has a hidden object, for lack of a better word, a hidden boon that may be picked up. And it's not just that you have to wander through this dungeon and eventually you'll find a key and then also an object. There's some little behavior you have to engage with in each level of this dungeon, each 60 of them, all 60, to make this hidden item appear. Now, what are these items? Well, for instance, they range from boots that make you move twice as fast to a pickaxe that lets you knock down one wall in a dungeon, but if you use it twice, it breaks. To certain books and items that actually prevent you from finishing the game, to a handful of pieces of armor that are required in order to even get to the final level of the game.
The candle. There's the candle that reveals ghosts that are hidden.
I'm going to pull up the actual Druaga list of items because, to be honest, I've made it as far as the 5th level in this game and no farther. It is quite a bastard.
I got to level 7, which is considered my best.
Whoa,
ever.
pro gamer here.
You really do it. So it's like the proto mystery dungeon game in a lot of ways, and something that I think. How much of this game is randomly generated? The format for the maze?
0.
There's no random generation.
Nope.
Okay. But the spawn rates or where things will pop off is kind of random.
Yeah, they kind of they're manipulatable as far as I know, but the layouts are consistent.
Okay,
yeah.
So again, we're gonna say this term a lot when we talk about Gauntlet. This is designed in a way to take your quarters. This is designed in a way to give you at least that first level where it's not that hard. Like I could consistently get past level 1 and 2. And then I would just usually hit a brick wall by the time I got to level 3. And that's usually the arcade template, which is give them a good enough feeling for the start so as that they don't get completely dejected and just walk away to a different arcade game, but kill those motherfuckers that are playing this game within X number of minutes.
Yeah, and the quarter sucker thing, the amazing thing is this game didn't have continues. You could not just drop a quarter in and continue playing, which was the innovation the Famicom version of this had, incidentally, is you could continue. It's one of the reasons this was a very, very widely regarded as a good thing when it came out on the Famicom. But yeah, it wasn't just like, oh, you died, it's okay, drop in another 100 yen. It was just like, oh, start from level 1. Fuck you. But yeah, so to get the first thing you'll pick up in the first dungeon is a pickaxe, which you get from defeating 3 slimes. So far, so good. The second thing you'll get in the second floor is a pair of boots that move you twice as fast. You get that by defeating 2 slimes, 2 black slimes. So far, so good. Third thing you pick up is a potion, which gives you an extra life. By the way, your lives are basically finite. This is one of the only ones you get. You get this by defeating one of the knights in the room. There's 2 knights in the room, and it's randomly selected which one is going to proc this potion. So really you need to beat both of them, unless you get lucky. Floor 4, you get a bell that will chime when you face the direction that the key is in the maze.
the first time you enter it. You get that by walking over the door to get you out of the maze before you pick up the key. So we're starting to get fucky. The 5th floor is where things start getting actually awful. You get a sword pickup, which doesn't necessarily make your sword better, but what it does do is you basically need to pick up every one of these sword pickups in succession to get the ultimate weapon in the game to beat the final boss. And basically, if you miss one of these in sequence, all of the sword pickups subsequently are broken. You get that by blocking.
The order of this is pretty particular.
Yeah.
You have to grab things in a specific order, otherwise the next one will not spawn. Yeah.
You get this by blocking 3 wizard spells. So blocking, worth talking about, because this, in sort of proto-Zelda, proto-East logic, you have your facing to be concerned about, and you have a shield. That shield is out until you draw your sword. The way I describe drawing your sword on the HD 101 podcast is it's like a 4-frame animation, but they don't play out like, it's like a 60 hertz game, right? So there's 60 individual frames per second. It doesn't take 4 frames for the sword to come out. It takes what feels like 4 years for the sword to come out. Like each one of those frames is like a moment in time that you can watch this man like slowly like dirt, and then it's out in front of you. And then you're just kind of like running through things with your sword. But the shield is still facing, I think, your left or your right. I think it's your left side. That shield can block spells, but you get into a very specific fuck game around your positioning in this map to block stuff with a shield correctly.
What's the game juice like in a fuck game, Jeff?
It's a nightmare, and if you're like, wow, those sound like some of the most particular tasks I've ever heard. Did I mention that you have to do 60 of these? And a couple of these hurt you, by the way. So why did people like this? So here's what happened, and this is a thing that may have been born before Druaga, but it's what really kind of became its sort of calling card.
Real quick, just want to point this out. So if you forget to get a required item, instead of moving forward, sometimes the game just sends you backwards to an earlier floor.
That part too.
So you have to restart the entire level all over again, and you lose your progress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and everything's trying to kill you, too, by the way.
Also, you move slow as shit without those boots.
Yes.
And there is a fairly strict time limit to each level before glowing orbs of death come.
Yeah, there's orbs that fill in the maze if you're in there too long, like the Mario Bros, not Super Mario Bros. The wizards are functionally hit scan at a certain point.
And then there are the indestructible spheroid thing. So if you ever wondered where the ghost from Spelunky came from, it came from this game, where if you run out of time, just 2 murder machines, Will-o'-the-Wisps, I think is what they're technically called, just charge after Gilgamesh, and then that's just like a time countdown in terms of you get the fuck out or you're dead.
It's bonkers. So here's what people did, famously. One, this is a game that got a lot of guides written about it. The video game guide industry in Japan had existed for a while at this point. And they were just like, how to get good at Pac-Man, like the book, basically. Guides for this game sold quite well, and I don't own any, but I'm told they're really fun collector's pieces, so it's something I'm going to look for more next time I go. The other part of this was dorks would basically leave notebooks at Druaga machines of like, here's what you do, basically. And they would kind of collectively, collaboratively brute force their way through these games, leaving notes for each other as a sort of community exercise. This is why you can say, and have it be a germane and worthwhile and accurate thing, Dark Souls is like so indebted to Tower of Druaga, it's not even funny. Like the entire FromSoft oeuvre, like back to Kingsfield, tumbles out of this game. And it's not even just that. Like, you can more directly and neatly say, like, Hydlide and Zelda and Ys and Sorcerer. Like, kind of everything that tumbles out of that, like, sort of Falcom, T&E Soft, Nintendo. Like, the amount of things that this inspired it's unfathomable. Like the entire
Jeff,
video game
are you
world owes a
saying
debt
this
to
is the triumph of the will of Japanese video games?
This is the birth of a nation of video games.
Come on, guys, we know that's Space Harrier.
He said it. He finally admitted his horrible perversion is bad for
Space Harrier rules.
Welcome to the fantasy zone.
Having said all of that, this game is a real bastard to play. Like, I haven't gotten it across. These two should just get it out of their systems to convey to you just how miserable it is to, like, do this. Particularly Blind. You don't even have to listen to them, though. If you don't believe you could go read no less than, like, Jeff Gerstmann's opinion on Druaga. Because that's the other sort of divergent point. Like, very popular in Japan. Gets reissued several times across, consoles and various Japanese computers. This game did not see North America except for, like, very, very dim evidence of, like, test market stuff till it got put in the Namco Museum collections on the PS1. And every reviewer that touched those was like, yeah, Mappy's cool and Phozon seems weird. This Druaga thing, though, this piece of shit. What the fuck is this? Like, nothing nice to say about it at all. Which is even wilder because the Namco Museum release of this on the PS1 has, I think, not just one, but two entirely new separate sets of dungeons that are hidden in that game. So, if you like this at all, first of all, congratulations. The Famicom version has, I think, a second set of dungeons. But yeah, that PS1 version, it's the raw-ass arcade version of Druaga. And then, if you're like, 60 more levels that are even more messed up. And then 60 more levels after that are even more messed up. And I will tell you, because I've seen the Famitsu numbers, that copy of Namco Museum sold pretty good over there. There's a market for this game. When Baten Kaitos got released in Japan, they reissued...
It was a pre-order bonus.
Yeah, there is a GameCube version of the Famicom release of Druaga that I kind of want to have, but if I'm honest, I'm literally looking at my Famicom copy of Druaga right now. It is over on my shelf. And playing it is a sucky thing.
Jeff, I thought I was sick.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm collecting Namco Famicom
He
games.
collects the instruments of his torture.
Yeah.
I also remember when Nintendo was trying to introduce the Virtual Console arcade service. They had 4 games to say, man, we're going to take classic arcade games seriously on the Wii Virtual Console. We've got Mappy. We've got Ga Plus. We got Star Force. We have Tower of Druaga. But we also got Mappy. But yeah, this was one of 4 games that introduced the Virtual Console arcade service for the Wii.
Ga Plus, man.
That's a game.
Not Galaxian. Not Galaga. But
Nope.
Ga Plus.
Ga Plus.
Galaga 3.
Remember
it's a
when
choice.
they renamed Ga Plus to Galaga 3 because they knew if they released it in North America, it would cause too much confusion and no one would buy it?
That M2 developed fake Famicom port of Ga Plus is okay, I'll say. Not really germane to this conversation. So this got ported. We
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. I mean, you're the expert of the many times Namco has created disparate and different compilation discs and packages, but this is always in there. This is always a part of it's in the Namco gallery, it's in Namco history, it's in Namco Museum,
Several.
it's in the arcade archives by Hamster. It's always there. It will find its way. It's gonna be that and Dig Dug and fucking Galaxian are always there.
Galaxian kicks ass.
I remember my first exposure to this game, I think, was the GBA version, which I think was Namco Gallery. I don't know. You're the expert.
That is a Game Boy game, but yeah.
The Game Boy. And this came packaged with Galaxian, Dig Dug, and that baseball game. What was that called? Family Stadium.
Yeah, that is Famitsu 4, which is the only release of Famitsu. Famista 4.
Famista.
Yeah. Yeah, there's 3 discrete Famista games on the Game Boy, and then the 4th one is just compiled into that, which is Druaga has its own discrete release as well. So the gallery was a weird compilation of stuff, and there were 3 of them. They're neat. They're sort of like smaller versions of the Namco Museum things on the PlayStation.
Yeah. But that was my first exposure to Tower of Druaga. So I came into this with only knowing the GBA version. and then I played the arcade release, and then I think I played I think the version of this game I enjoyed the most was the weird 16-bit remake for the PC Engine. I thought that looked cool, and it had good music.
Yeah. Braden, what's your life experience with Drulog?
You said, hey, let's play this video game. And I had heard about it, from whispers from you a lot. And because ZP keeps saying, let's watch the anime. It's terrible.
There's an anime there.
And
You should watch the anime. You
No.
should watch the anime.
I'm not going to.
You guys
no.
talk about how you want to do an easy podcast. Let's watch the Tower Drop.
I have said before, I do not want to do an anime watch podcast.
We should do the anime of Tower Draga. It has a really bad plot twist that I think would make both of you laugh real hard.
I looked it up. I already looked it up. It sounds bad. Okay, I've saved myself 13 hours.
Ta-da.
Did
you find anything enjoyable with this at all?
No. So, Jeff, I played this game. I attempted to play this game for about 45 minutes. I didn't realize that you had to hold the button for your sword to go out, which it turns out is a vital part of how you poke things with a sword. But then also, if you try to poke things with your sword while they're in the middle of an animation jumping to another square on the map, that won't hurt them, and then you'll die. I got to like level 3 or 4, and I hate it.
You hate it.
This is one of those arcade games that, if not for its historical relevance, would be one of those things where it's like, hey, remember Tower of Draga? Yeah, it's right next to Satan's Hollow.
Oh, come on. Satan's Hollow isn't great, but it's like bullshit cool. It's really crazy that Satan's Hollow got compiled in that Midway collection I discovered recently.
Did? I know this because that's how I played Gauntlet.
Oh,
Hey,
spoilers.
let's talk about good games.
Yeah, do we want to rank Draga now?
Well, is there anything historic? I think we should talk about. You kind of talked about it, but Tower Draga. Say what you will about this actual game. It went on to inform a lot of people. It went on to pioneer genre conventions. There are ideas and concepts, whether it's like Spelunky, as I say, or RPGs that are still using key ideas and concepts from Draga. It has had an indelible mark, and you know that because it went on to spawn an entire franchise, the Babylonian Castle Saga, which has different types of games. It's been going since the release of Tower Draga, and they've been making more games. They continue to make games. They even made an MMORPG.
An MMO. They had a mystery dungeon-ish game on the PS2, Fushigi no Dungeon, which got released in America as Fushigi no Dungeon, I believe, which is pretty wild. Yeah, they've tried stuff with it. None of them have really had the critical reception and I think the impact and influence that the original has. And it's also one of the more miserable things you could play, even with a guide. Because that's the thing, is it's not like, oh, you just need to know things. Like, you do need to know things, but you also need to be executing like 100% of the time. To wit, ways you can make your life better. The Famicom version has continues, which is nice. The Game Boy version is like a soft step into actual persistent stats and RPG-ness. That's kind of neat. The PC Engine version is like a step further and has full-on stats and sort of, what would you call them? Your D&D scores, your ability ratings, basically, your strength and dexterity and the like. Inherent characteristics that you level up with points, and hints between the levels from Princess Kai, which have been localized. Fan translated. So that PC Engine, the maces are a little different. It's not like a one-to-one arcade conversion, but it's also in many ways probably the best way to experience that game. So if I were to try to hard sell people on a version of Draga to go check out, that's not raw ass arcade, PC Engine for sure. So yeah, do we rank this now or do we hold these off till the end?
I don't care. Braden, it's your call. Coin flip. All at once, or let's do this now?
Let's do this now.
Okay.
What's at the top? What's the top 3, bottom 3?
Top 3. Mandate of Heaven, Might and Magic 6.
Back.
We've got Suikoden at number 2 after that. We have Xenosaga Episode 1, Dervils Are Mocked at number 3. At the bottom of this list, we have Secret of the Stars by Tecmo, followed by Aiden Chronicles the First Mage by H2O Entertainment, followed by the bottom of this list, which is Unlimited Saga by Square. Maybe you've heard of them. So that's, look, influence. The only thing that gets this
I'll
midway
say,
up this
I think
list
this is
influence.
better than Unlimited Saga.
Yeah.
Let's go on. Let's start from the bottom. Is this worse, Braden? Is this worse or better than Unlimited Saga? It's better. I'm willing to say this is better.
I mean, fundamentally, on a historical level, it's better. It's not a dense mass that Unlimited Saga
Pain
is.
and agony. I mean, it's pain and agony, but it's got at least a reason.
Yeah, it was
It
1984. They didn't know how to make games good then.
Don't like that. Don't like that at all.
You say something.
Really,
How can you
everyone
so true
hated
and yet
this.
so brave?
I think this game is
Better than Unlimited Saga.
I think this game goes between the third ages
What?
somewhere.
I think you are high on dust, sir.
Largely for
You
its
are
influence.
high on your own supply.
Influence gotta count. Come on, gotta give it that.
What the fuck? No, I mean,
All right, all
okay,
right,
say what
all
you
right.
will about our third age experience. Wait, are we saying GBA or GBA version of third age, or like OG
I
console
said
release
between
third
the
age?
two. So
I don't know,
that's a
man.
crease
I
that
mean,
gets you. You got your Arabian Nights, you got your Jade Empire. I mean, sure.
I hate Jade Empire with a burning passion.
but it's
But
a
at
functional
least Jade
video
Empire
game.
is a video game I can play
I can
and
finish.
understand.
All right, I'll shut. Okay, how about Revengers of Vengeance? Can I get at that?
I think this would go above Revengers of Vengeance.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, bad game's not fun. On influence alone, I want to give it a dead cat bounce at least that high, but no higher.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I have thrown some shit at this. Playing this, not particularly fun. Okay, so that is where Draga no Toll, the Tower of Draga, is going to live forever. The next game we're going to be talking about has Namco ties as well, oddly enough. It's Gauntlet. Maybe you've heard of it. Gauntlet, it was originally developed by Atari Games. Notice the Games. It was published by Atari Games. Notice the Games. For the arcade. It was released in October 1985, either in the UK or North America. Wikipedia, the sole arbiter of truth in the 21st century, seems to think it came out in the UK first. I think that would be pretty exceptional. Gauntlet was subsequently released on, in no particular order, the Amstrad CPC, the Atari ST, the Apple II, the Apple II GS, the Macintosh, Commodore 64, the Microsoft MSX, the Sega Master System, the NES, the Genesis, Stroke Mega Drive, which is the one I want to talk about, the Speccy, the old ZX Spectrum from Sinclair, the DOS, the PlayStation 1, and then it had soft reboot things in Dark Legacy, and the other one, Gauntlet Legends. ZP, I cede the floor.
Yeah, Gauntlet is probably one of my all-time most nostalgic video game franchises. I would argue that they never made a bad Gauntlet because I'm sick in the head. The way that Jeff talks about Space Harrier and Space Harrier clones and spin-offs, like making him feel all warm and tingly, that's how I feel about Gauntlet. So it's funny, my first exposure to this game was the re-release of the game in '86 with the two-player version. So when Gauntlet first released, it was considered kind of one of the first big multiplayer dungeon crawl arcade games. And it was even like one of the biggest multiplayer, more than two-player arcade games in general. You could have 4 people right next to each other play this game simultaneously, which ties
Was this
into
the first 4-player arcade game?
It was one of. I don't think it was the absolute first, but it was the one that basically figured it out, which is they made the original Gauntlet arcade cabinet massive. I mean, it was a huge arcade cabinet. If you ever see one, it's kind of something worth seeing because it had to fit 4 bodies, 4 adult bodies. And so I ended up playing the 2-player variant that they re-released when people were like, we want this arcade money, but we don't have enough space. And I played it with my brother, my stepbrother, and I would be the wizard, he would be the warrior. And that was always the agreement, because if you can get into a good vibe with all those people around you, in this case, just that your other partner, you can actually get pretty far in Gauntlet. And it's a very simple game. There's a lot of things to be said about this. So this was designed by Ed Logg, who is kind of a cool dude. Ed Logg was the designer of a number of classic arcade games. He had a hand in like the Atari 2600 stuff. I think he co-developed the video game Asteroids with Lyle Rains, and he also is the guy who invented Centipede and Millipede. And so he made Centipede, Millipede, and then Gauntlet. This was like the trifecta for him. And it's kind of a big deal. The one thing is similar to another game we'll talk about later. It was kind of tied up in a lawsuit because the release of this game immediately led to, I believe, someone from Atari's Program Exchange accusing Gauntlet of plagiarizing a game for the 8-bit family computer system, Dandy. And of course, it was very funny because they're all just in communication with Atari. People kind of forget this, but if you wanted to make a game for Atari, you basically had to be owned by Atari. It's a real weird thing. This is why it's sad to think of Activision as this monopolistic kind of evil corporation, but they were rooted in being one of the first North American independent developers. But this game is cool. It was a massive North American success story. I mean, some people were saying that a single cabinet could generate them in just 1 month $10,000.
Yeah, that checks out.
And it was an immediate success story for Atari. The way that this game trickles into Japan is it was picked up by Namco for the arcade release, and it was in a trade show before it got a full-on release in Japan, and it was in really strict competition, but Gauntlet in Japan ends up being like the second most popular, highest grossing arcade game, despite the fact that it was done in the American style arcade cabinet rather than the Japanese style of arcade cabinet. They did not change the format for the arcade release of Gauntlet in Japan, and it was only beat out by Space Harrier. It actually outsold Hang On and Pole Position 2 in the upright stand-up cockpit mode of arcade games. And it went on to be a franchise. The reason why I was insistent about covering Gauntlet is because after Gauntlet comes out, it gets a number of sequels. So Gauntlet 2, which is just a direct sequel by Atari Games, is just basically a classic arcade release sequel to a big monumental hit. It's a little bit harder, it's a little bit more complex, but it's still basically the same thing. Then it's followed by Gauntlet: The Third Encounter, which is also, I believe, so that was for the Lynx, if I seem to recall correctly. Mm-hmm. So they made a portable version of Gauntlet for the Lynx, and then they did Gauntlet 3, which was a home computer release by US Gold and Tengen. And then the final proper numbered Gauntlet game was Gauntlet 4, which Jeff is going to talk about because that's the one developed by M2 for the Sega Genesis. And then the arcade series was actually eventually revived with the release of Gauntlet Legends, and then Gauntlet Legends was a success story and followed up by Gauntlet Dark Legacy. And then eventually that leads you to the modern revival of Gauntlet 7 Sorrows, which we don't talk about. The reason why I wanted to do Gauntlet is because it's the reverse of some of the games that we talk about that are arcade games. Because Gauntlet is kind of sort of an RPG. You pick the traditional character classes. They each play differently in very superficial but notable ways. It requires multiplayer cooperation between players. But in terms of like being an RPG, it's kind of an RPG. But the weird thing is that when Atari tried to port this game to consoles or home computers or, just generally tried to keep the money train rolling, they kept insisting that Gauntlet had to be an RPG. And so every single post-Gauntlet 1, post-Gauntlet 2 release of Gauntlet, they've been very insistent about taking this very by-the-numbers hack-and-slash arcade game and adding RPG elements to, well, I think YouTube will say, mixed results.
I understand fundamentally Gauntlet absolutely is an RPG in the sense that it is basing itself off of classic dungeon crawlers because you're a bunch of fantasy people. You are exploring maze-like environs and you are getting loot and killing things. So, the only thing that's missing is numbers. That said,
it's a good game.
Yeah, turns out Gauntlet's okay. Maybe not alone.
It is also a very clear example of how arcade games made a lot of their money.
Yeah, to wit, this is not the first arcade game by any stretch of the imagination that had the ability to continue by inserting a coin, but it is maybe the most... It was really cutting edge and pioneering in ways that would make you do that. So it is a top-down ARPG where you are moving through mazes, killing monsters en masse, and it's all very neat. But the entire time you're doing this, you have a health pool, and that health pool 100% of the time is ticking down. There is food in the dungeon and various, so many, wall meat equivalents in this game that you can stave that off. But while you're in this game, while you're living, you're dying. The goal being eventually you're just going to die. But you can drop in another quarter and keep that shit rolling. It's a very, very ruthless money grabbing arcade game. That's why it made a lot of its money. The gameplay loop is smooth-brained enough that sticking in that next quarter doesn't feel so bad because you want to have more smooth brain action. As to its RPG-ness, I'll tell you a story about me. So my first time playing a Gauntlet was Gauntlet 4 for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. So here's the secret, if you don't already know. Gauntlet 4 was released in Japan on the Japanese Mega Drive as... You guys know the answer to this? Just Gauntlet. Because it's just Gauntlet. It's literally just the original-ass Gauntlet. Plus, and a second new, totally spun from new cloth adventure mode thing. A quest mode. Mm-hmm. With multi-level dungeons you have to go through to get sort of meta-world goals to unlock a fifth dungeon to get through. All playable co-op with persistent stats and equipment you can buy. Very evocative. It is maybe the most loving arcade conversion on the Mega Drive, which is kind of remarkable because for a period that's where Namco was putting their best stuff immediately after it came out. And also Sega, perhaps you've heard of them, also in the arcade game, also did some really incredible conversions to the Mega Drive. Gauntlet might trump all of them. It is just a very, 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 very well done version of that first Gauntlet game with music. So you can toggle the music on or off. Off is the arcade experience. That game is just, people going, and wizard needs food badly, etc. But M2 put in an absolute stormer of a soundtrack in this game. It is unbelievably good. Maybe too good for Gauntlet, honestly. But this game was very evocative to me in first and second grade. They gave you little prompts as an elementary school student to just write a story. And half of my stories were about the cast of Gauntlet. Just off the back of playing this game as a kid with my brothers and my dad on the old Sega Genesis. So I have a fond spot in my heart for OG Gauntlet by way of Gauntlet 4, which I found out later in life was from this incredible, just amazing video game developing house in Japan. The first thing they ever made. I have less affection for the Legends Dark Legacy stuff because I didn't have those growing up. I saw them in arcades, but they were not what really drew me in. But I know those are really, really well liked. As far as other versions of Gauntlet goes, the thing about Gauntlet 3 on the links is it has your normal classes, but also has I think it's got like 13 classes in it. It's some insane amount.
Yes, it has a lot of it has an insane.
And a lot of them are
It's also an isometric 3D game.
Yeah.
It's not the traditional Gauntlet. It is the ZX Spectrum Atari ST style of isometric RPG for the 18 of you that understand what I'm saying when I say isometric Atari ST Amiga style RPG.
It's okay. All of those
Thumbs
people
up.
are in nursing homes now.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. It has 16-bit color, which is an improvement over the original. But yeah, you have the Petras, you've got a Rockman, you've got Dracolis, you've got the Lizardmen, the Blizzards. You got even different types of people in that game. The only problem with Gauntlet 3 is that it only supports 2 players, which to me is Gauntlet sacrilege, even though that was how I originally experienced the game.
You had a Lynx?
No, I've played it through other alternative means.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But no, you mentioned that the music is good in Gauntlet 4. It's important to note that the people who made the music for Gauntlet 4 were the the Final Fantasy Tactics team. So that's Hitoshi Sakamoto. And then also Masaharu Iwata, who we've talked about before because he's the Ogre Tactics guy who did the music for Ogre Tactics.
So take that flavor and make it like, for lack of a better word, a little more driving. So, like, some of the music is very, like, pumped up fantasy, and then some of it is just incredible, atmospheric, broody, dark shit that, like, when I hear people talk yang about the Sega Genesis and, like, how crappy Gems was, etc., and, like, how bad the music is, it's, like, the first thing you grab immediately. Be like, okay, but have you heard this? Like, you know, Streets of Rage 2, pretty good soundtrack. Gauntlet 4's soundtrack might actually be better. It's
Jeff,
wild.
I'm going to listen to this now, live, on the air.
I think this will be a strong contender for best music. I forgot to mention that Ed Logg also was the lead designer of San Francisco Rush
Okay.
and Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey.
3D Hockey, the N64 port of that is pretty good.
Could I interest you into a game of Cybots?
No, I do not want Cybots.
But
Also,
anyways.
the Namco connection here is kind of fun. So this is Atari Games, which is one of the 2 companies that came out of Atari after they got broken up after the Warner business in '82. So you wind up with Atari Incorporated, the makers of fine home computers like the Atari ST, etc. And then on the other side of that, and also the Lynx and the Jag, etc. On the other side of that, you have Atari Games, which is strictly an arcade game company making arcade games, and they have, you know, that's where Paperboy and the like came out of, and Gauntlet. That company is the one that spun off a shell company called Tengen, and all of this gets married to Namco by way of Namco bought out Atari's Japan concerns in the late 70s, and some of those personnel moved back and forth between Namco's offices in Japan and the Atari Games office in North America. So when Gauntlet gets released for the NES, it was originally a gray cart normal licensed release, and then shortly thereafter it got released again as one of those black cartridges, the unlicensed Tengen games. Among those were also Rolling Thunder and Pac-Man, maybe you've heard of those, Namco games. So Atari Games, I think, is now rolled back up into the larger Atari concern, and all of that is owned by someone in France, I think.
No, because Atari
Infogrames.
Games became Midway.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
and now
WB
WB owns all of that.
and then it went back to Warner Brothers, which is kind of weird to think how there's that. But yeah, if you're thinking of the French company, you're thinking of the
Infogrames, yeah.
Infogrames.
Infogrames, which was part
Then
of
back to
Hasbro.
Atari, and then now they're making supposedly hotels, which
No, the
Hey.
hotel got canceled, I think.
Yeah.
I am kind of excited for that 50th anniversary compilation.
Also, Jeff, I have listened to some of the Gauntlet 4 soundtrack for Genesis. You were right. It is a banger.
It's pretty
kind of
fucking cool.
insane how good
it is. That bassy synth of the Genesis used for good instead of evil.
So, I mean, if Jeff is going to mount a defense of Tower of Jiraga, so first off, I will defend Gauntlet Legends and Gauntlet Dark Legacy until the day I die. I've got too much pent-up nostalgia for those games and playing them with my little sister and my brother. But Gauntlet Dark Legacy could literally run over your dog, and I would still call it a beautiful little baby boy, even though probably the funniest version of Gauntlet Dark Legacy, Jeff back me up, has to be the Dreamcast port of Gauntlet Dark Legacy because, oh boy, that's a version of that game. It looks like such complete crap, but I love it.
Like
the game looks like shit.
I think
no, it doesn't. It's beautiful. It's a 3D fully rendered.
I
game.
think every version of that game looks like shit. So.
No, it doesn't. It's a 3D rendered game when that was really tough to make, and you full motion, and it's like a Mario Party game, but an arcade, and you got to beat the bosses.
Now I understand.
Look, that game came out like Power Stone. Also a 3D game.
It's better than Power Stone.
You're out of your mind.
You are, sir. Here's the thing. I owned Gauntlet Dark Legacy on the GameCube and played quite a bit of it. I revisited it within the last few months. It's fucking terrible. It is mindless and zero fun to play by yourself.
Always Gauntlet. It's a mindless little fun thing that you do to play with your friends, and you're all working cooperatively to... It's like,
Motherfucker, I would rather play more Tiny Tina's Wonderlands than ever touch Gauntlet Dark Legacy
if you want to watch us play Tiny Tina's and complain about it non-stop for 3 hours at a time.
Ugh.
We do need to establish which version of Gauntlet are we actually ranking on this podcast.
The original.
If we're going to do multiple versions, then I want a separate ranking for the PC Engine version of Druaga to get it like 2 more pips because I'm petty. No. And if we're not going to do that, then we're going base-ass arcade Gauntlet 1.
Regular, I got it in the Midway Arcade Treasures compilation that's on 360 that is back compat on modern Xbox.
Midway's kind of... So, god dang, compilation tier rankings. So, obviously, the high watermark has to be Namco, right, Jeff? And then maybe below that, Capcom, and then Midway.
Sega's a dark horse in this conversation.
I was going to say...
Kids love Golden
Genesis
Axe.
Mega Drive release of all of those classic games. I think the only shitty thing was when they pulled all of the Sonic games from the Genesis Mega Drive compilation so as that they could resell them.
Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection on the 360 and PS3, like the emulation quality is kind of dodgy, and the arcade games in particular are like actually kind of poorly done.
I still to this day don't know why they've done that compilation pack for the Genesis Mega Drive has like Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4, but they've never really done anything with the original Phantasy Star.
That's because the first Phantasy Star is a Master System.
It's a Master System game, but they haven't done anything. No Master System love.
It's included in that Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection.
There's a Sega Ages version of Phantasy Star.
Yeah, there's that release, and then that PS3 360 one's got Phantasy Star 1 in it as well.
Okay. But anyways,
live on stream.
It's okay.
Not actually on stream.
It obviously has to be Namco. Maybe Sega, then Capcom or Midway. I could go either way with those two.
I have a lot of fondness for the original Midway Arcade Treasures for the GameCube.
I think they lost interest in that business, but those 3 compilation discs on the GameCube are pretty damn good.
I played a lot of Rampart, despite the fact that is a game meant for a trackball.
Like Rush 2049's on one of those, I think. Got your Hydro Thunder.
That's right. The third one was all driving games.
The Wings of War.
And the second one was all the murder games. So you had Narc and Mortal Kombat. But weirdly enough, they had regular MK3 and not UMK3. Strange.
Odd decisions. But those are good. If you find those kicking around a used game shop, they're worth picking up. Or you could hack your Xbox and just put them on there. Just put them on.
Or you could just buy Midway Arcade Treasures on Xbox Live for $5.
If you're good about redeeming every game with gold release, you may already have that because it was one of them at some point. So look in your Xbox library. You might just have that Midway collection just in there.
Bring your friends round and play a game of Rampart together.
Let's put Gauntlet on this and then cover our last thing.
Yeah.
And then go to bed.
I think that we start in the middle with Gauntlet.
I would play Gauntlet over
Third Age.
The Third Age.
Yeah, like
What do you say,
Gauntlet's
Jeff?
a pretty simple game, but it's very pick up and playable. There's no denying that. So yeah, I'd put it above.
It's a Skinner box. It feels
You can
good.
you can yell at your friends.
I would go.
If you had any still.
Okay.
What's above
So
Third Age, Jeff?
Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, Gaiden,
It's less problematic
Yeah.
and it gives you as much satisfaction. Let's
Zelda
go up.
2. Yeah,
Boy,
No.
feels weird.
I'm gonna put my foot down here.
I think that this is more satisfying than Zelda 2.
Here's what confounds the Zelda 2 thing. Zelda 2 is below East 3, Wanderers from East, and I'm like,
Jeff, I played East.
maybe I'd flip those.
I've played other East games. They're like Gauntlet, but better.
Yeah.
So below Yeast, but above Zelda 2?
I finished East 1 literally yesterday.
Yeah.
It loads right into East 2, which is incredibly cool.
Yes.
Like specifically the Steam release, it will straight up just launch. It will close the game and launch East 2 if you have it installed. Anyway, bump system for life, homie.
What if we just put East 1 at the top of this list and then we
No.
stop?
Yeah, we should
Yeah.
play that.
So Gauntlet.
East Origins, on the other hand, Oath of Felghana, hell of a game. East 9, Monstrum Nox,
Really good.
also very good.
Zelda.
Stop.
Gauntlet vis-a-vis Zelda 2, above or below?
Above.
Below.
It's all up to you. You're the kingmaker, Jeff. Jefferson, I love you.
Yeah, I want to put it. I want to make one of you happy, and I can't make both of you happy. It's killing me. I want to put it in Zelda 2.
Make yourself happy, Jeff.
There is an element of frustration with both of these games. I mean, if you want to do this like 1A, 1B.
No. I'm gonna let's go. Let's do up. Let's give it up.
I guess here's the point I would make is if you are playing OG Arcade Gauntlet in this year of our Lord 2022, there's nothing to stop you from putting in infinite credits.
Yeah.
And thus remove the game's like core challenge and loop, which is bilk as much money out of 1980s kids as possible.
And the only way you can do that is if you play the Switch version of Zelda 2.
Yeah, put it above
anyways.
Zelda 2. That's
Okay. I will help Jeff out and say I don't think this is better than Yeast 3.
Yeah.
I mean, the soundtrack alone, not as good as East 3.
Yeah. They did a good soundtrack for this eventually, and it's still not as good as any of the East 3 soundtrack. Okay, that was the most fraught of these because now we've got
The Super Spy.
We got a weird piece of crap that Jeff kept yelling into our ears about on Discord. Like, I gotta show you this game. Guys,
I understand
I
why.
need you to play. I need you to play this.
Why are you being weird? I do that too.
Yeah, I do that a lot as well. I should not judge.
Arcade RPG. It's a weird, peanut butter chocolate situation, but it's more like chocolate tuna fish thing. Like the two don't necessarily gel that well when you really like think about it, but you get some flavor. That's why I think Gauntlet kind of succeeds in this realm because like Gauntlet's got flavor, right? It's got fantasy sort of role play flavor. Everyone wants to be a wizard, etc. Draga got some setting. There's it eventually got morphed literally into an RPG. The Super Spy, which was originally developed by SNK and published by SNK for the Neo Geo MVS arcade system, and originally released in October 8th, apparently 1990, in Japan. This game got subsequently released in North America and in Europe, and then re-released on the Neo Geo CD in all territories that particular system came out in. And this is a very uncomfortable marriage of Punch-Out esque first-person action, dungeon crawl, and stat and experience-based RPG. And I think it is generously a noble failure. But it is one of the most Shoggoth-ish things I've seen in quite a long while.
The Super Spy.
So, what is the Neo Geo? Where do you start? SNK is an arcade company. They started in the 70s, like a lot of these guys.
Nihon something.
They made, Athena. Maybe you've heard of... They made...
Ikari Warriors.
Ikari Warriors might be the most notable, successful games they made in this period. Some of these games got converted to the NES. They made a couple things specifically for the NES, most famous of those probably being Crystallis, which might be a game we played someday.
That game has interesting ideas.
It's a Zelda-esque, but bigger, and maybe to its detriment. They didn't invent the idea of an arcade system with swappable games, basically. Like this is where you wind up with like the JAMA standard of arcade stuff, in a sense. But Data East had a cassette-based arcade system called the DecaVision, or just the Deco. In the early 80s, it's where Burger Time was originally developed for. But SNK developed this standard, for lack of a better word, for arcade hardware, the Neo Geo. So these manifested in America, anyway, as these red cabinets that never seemed to just go the hell away. And it's because they got games on this system that was developed in like early to mid 1990 up through 2005. And they would basically have, depending on the SKU that you bought, 1 or 2 or 4 or 6, those are pretty rare, cartridge slots inside of them. And arcade operators would buy, the standalone system, and then they would buy these big carts, they're big, foot-wide cartridges, and slot them in, and players could go up to this machine, swap between different games, and drop in a quarter and play whichever one. They were home to a lot of really celebrated fighters, like maybe you've heard of The Last Blade 2, King of Fighters 98, Samurai Showdown, Garou, Mark of the Wolves, Art of Fighting, Fatal Fury, Waku Waku 7, etc. Slowly turned into a thing that was largely fighting games, but there's also incredible, just kind of general action games on there too. Most notably, The Metal Slug. There were some shooters. It was a long, not long, but like 200 or 300 games got developed for this thing. And they were kind of noted for just how big temporally, but also memory-wise, the cartridges were in their day. Like, at a point where, Chrono Trigger, which I think was like a 32 megabyte game, or 32 megabits, so a 4 megabyte game that was like sold for like $80 or some shit, $100 in parts of the United States. SNK was putting like 690 megabits of store memory on these cartridges, like just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megabits of storage at a time where that was seen as like wild and stunting, very expensive. There's a home version of this system that they would release these games on, very lightly adapted, sometimes with different continue systems. And that was noted for, at the time, the hardware alone was like
AES.
$600, and then the games would retail for between like $2 and $3. The aftermarket on that shit in particular is insane.
Yeah, don't look up the price of anything that is AES hardware or even the console.
Yeah.
They knew what they were doing with the AES. Like Neo Geo knew that we are not competing against the NES, Super NES. We're not competing even against the Genesis. They cornered the arcade market and knew that there was a niche audience that wanted the arcade experience at home, come hell or high water, and they priced it appropriately for that purpose. But yeah, the AES was succeeded by the Neo Geo CD, which is its own little thing. Yeah. But even that is super fucking expensive.
Don't forget the Neo Geo 64.
Right, the Hyper Neo Geo 64. Excuse your mouth.
Yeah, and the CD, the I've been watching the YouTube channel is called Basement Brothers, and it's okay. but they're just kind of doing a chronogaming thing of Neo Geo stuff. And the thing about the CD games is some of them, even to this day, are like reasonably priced as opposed to buying the cart versions of these games. But they had load times. Initially, some of them, it was just because the games were small enough early on in the life of that system. They were, I think the smallest game on that system was like 24 megabit. So, like a 3 megabyte game. Those load fairly quick from a CD. That is, the whole thing gets dumped into RAM and it just kind of goes. Some of them didn't even have Redbook audio, which is literally the whole game just in RAM and just play. But as that system wore on, the games got larger and larger. There'd be like a big, fat, multi-minute long initial load into RAM, and then it would just constantly be pulling stuff from disk to keep going, because it would be like, several hundred megabytes large at a point. So they made a revision of that system that was like a 2-speed CD reader that was notably faster. Yeah, all this is like bonkers. So what the hell is the Super Spy? It's a fairly early game for the Neo Geo, and it's an RPG. You are some sort of agent man in a CIA agent.
It is CIA.
I should have probably read like the press for this thing. I'm just kind of.
I have the PDF press. Do you want me to do this?
Please pull the plot for me.
You are CIA agent Roy Hart and need to travel through an office building that has been taken over by a terrorist group known as the Zolgi King terrorist group, led by the mysterious King. Fun fact, when you meet King, he bears a kind of weird resemblance to Geese Howard. And this group is murdering people in the building, causing its destruction. And as Mr. Hart, you, the player, must hunt these terrorists down and stop them from using the factory to make bombs. Ask me anything. I'm on Reddit.
How big are the sprites?
The sprites are
huge. So big.
Fantastic.
The thing that we should also mention is kind of how you play this. So you enter these what could be considered kind of like mini arenas. As you said, it's a first person game, but your movement is primarily strafing that allows you to find where the enemies are, and then only able to move forward into corridors that lead to the next level. In order for you to leave the current environment that you are in, you must defeat all of the enemies that are in the screen. And that first person effect, so you punch, you can use weapons, eventually you'll get guns. You can either pistol whip with those guns or use the bullets. And
you kick and you duck. And
yes.
It's all very vaguely Punch-Out-esque, but imagine if Punch-Out
was not as satisfying.
Yeah. Imagine if Punch-Out was not as satisfying and threw like 3 or 4 guys at you at once with guns or knives. It feels so. Moving around in this game feels very weird because you're strafing back and forth between, like for lack of a better word, it's like a imagine a high school corridor or whatever. But you can only sidestep except for when there's a clear hallway to the next thing you can sort of sidestep through. It's very peculiar. To get down these corridors, basically, to move forward, you have to be more or less perfectly aligned with them and then push forward, which leads to a really slow, but kind of impressive, I guess, scaling effect, which was not something widely seen on the Neo Geo at that point. And, you'll be interrupted by more kind of generic terrorist ninja suit people. You have your classic sort of like the basic ones are green, and then the more aggressive ones are like color-based mook capacity, I guess. And interrupting all of this are basically broom closets, for lack of a better word, that you go into, which again you must be sort of weirdly aligned with to enter, and you do this by just pushing up on the joystick. When you go into these little rooms, they're set encounters as far as I know. Occasionally there'll be, a boss, like a mini boss, or just kind of like a random encounter with a dude. Or you'll run into one of the scientists and or office staff people. When you run into one of these scientists, you have displayed for you some of the most dodgy translated dialogue.
Poorly translated, and also big comic booky font that doesn't even fit the dialogue box properly. Like it's improperly cropped or fitted into the
all
box.
Caps, so everyone's just yelling 100% of the time. One of the first people you run into just says terrorist camp and arms factory. That's it.
The one that I wrote down, too much blood, I'll treat it.
Followed by blood stopped, I'm stronger now. No punctuation.
Yeah.
None. I've written down several of these because I think they're the most amazing thing about this game, and I want to savor each one of them. So imagine each one of these is a fortune cookie. So you get power of knife is less the more it's used, which reflects accurately in the game. The more you use the knife you come with, it will eventually break, which really sucks. Bring it with, we could use a new knife, which is when a person gives you... Some of these, it's just not clear who's talking, which is amazing. They threaten us with the bomb, so we will free their own. That's from a scientist. If we wait, they will appear in the weapons room. Get over there. Nope, no punctuation. We are kept here and forced to build bombs. That's pretty clear. This is a mini-boss encounter. He says, who is it? Dogs. Safe room card. Defeat Miura. Okay, got that? Are we going to be destroyed as in the last terrorism? A man in a suit says this. A very fun one. You go into a bathroom and you just say, nobody is here. But given the rest of the context, it kind of looks like a urinal is telling you that nobody is here. It's amazing.
My favorite one that you didn't read, hidden cameras track us, but... What was the other note there? Hidden cameras track us, but we can stoop down and pass.
Yes, which is a mechanic. There are cameras in the level, and you can hold down the joystick and dodge, and you can scoot that way. It feels as good as it sounds. If you get lost, go to the road, use the radar to find your way. He must be talking about the hallway when he says this. I can hear the hard drive. You better not hang around. And perhaps my favorite one... this is a random office employee that you run into. He says, I'm with the Delta Force. I changed my appearance to just like a guy who looks roughed up in a suit. It's just...
The general quality of translations for Neo Geo games is that level of amazing. Like, you go as far as like SVC Chaos.
Yeah.
And it's still fucking absolute jank.
Yeah.
It's like Akuma being like, I'm gonna beat you up like a baby.
There's a game that came out before this called Riding Hero, which is a really bad Hang-On clone. Thing about Hang-On from Sega is it's a motorcycle with analog controls. So when you turn the motorcycle wheel, the wheel turns just so. You can't do that on a D-pad or an arcade joystick that's just orthogonal, basically, directions. So put you on a motorcycle and then remove all of the subtlety of the control of a motorcycle. The AES version of that game has an adventure mode in it, which is kind of an RPG-ish thing, but it really, really sucks and is incredibly grindy. And that grindy is kind of facilitated by a story with a translation that is at least this scuffed, if not worse, because it's a few months beforehand. It's unbelievably bad. The game itself, when you kill, these terrorists that you are killing in this building, they give you experience, and that experience does level you up slowly but surely, giving you better damage output and better damage resistance. There are also weapons that you're picking up. You can get, Uzi 9mm machine guns in addition to just a pistol. The pistol has like 12 rounds that you start with, and that is all the ammo you're going to get generally, so you kind of have to pick and choose when to use that. Like, in theory, there's some interesting stuff going on here, but the combat feels... I don't know if it feels terrible, but it feels very awkward. The sort of dodge uppercut thing you can do is, I don't know. None of this feels particularly good to do on an actual arcade stick and 4-button layout. And let me tell you, doing it on a controller didn't really help. But it does have experience, and it is, when you scroll around looking for Neo Geo RPGs, you get sort of 3 responses. You get, A, didn't you know there's a Samurai Showdown RPG on the Neo Geo CD
Right.
that was only released in Japan, to which you say, yeah, it hasn't been fan translated yet. Stop taunting me. And then past that, you get this and Crossed Swords 1 and 2.
Right. I was going to ask, how does this compare to Crossed Swords? Because I'm not super knowledgeable of especially the AES. It's kind of one of those weird areas where I just was not able to be a part of the zeitgeist because of cost, even when people stopped. We're not, even before the inflation of retro games, the AES was always expensive. Like, even when Neo Geo pulled the plug on supporting their consoles, like, it was always super expensive. But I don't know. Some people speak more positively of Crossed Swords being more functional, but I've never played it or seen it in action.
The thing it does differently is it tends to give you only 1 or 2 enemies to worry about at a time, which is an improvement over this, because I feel like the space you're sort of having to deal with laterally really sucks, especially when you got like 3 enemies on screen that are dodging left and right very quickly.
It does not feel like there is technique to this game. It does not feel like you as a player can influence your success positively or negatively.
The one thing I definitely am not a fan about from what I've seen of Crossed Swords, it does that weird wireframe model for the player's silhouette or the player's character, because it's from this very kind of pulled back vantage point. It's trying to do the left to right movement thing, and I've always not liked the way that looks. I didn't like it in Super Punch-Out, the arcade release of Super Punch-Out, and I don't like it from what I've seen of Crossed Swords. It's just a personal preference. I just think it's bad looking.
Yeah, you don't like Dynamite Duke?
No, absolutely not. Dynamite Duke is a bad game. Poo poo pee pee.
Yeah, like I think it's kind of a weird push. Crossed Swords, like I said, more manageable enemy encounters, but I think it's less RPG-ish. I don't know if that's necessarily for good or ill. Like, there's not really like a experience equivalent, but you are going to a shop between encounters and stuff like that.
This gets to the theory that you and Braden had talked about on the Discord, which is, Neo Geo really was kind of a 2-bit developer until they made Art of Fighting.
Yeah.
They really were kind of like a non-factor, like Capcom, Namco. Everybody else from Japan was such a big deal until SNK decided to copy their fucking homework.
They poached a couple of the lead developers from Street Fighter 2, and then they made Fatal Fury.
Yeah, that's when there's like a year-ish of like Neo Geo stuff prior to that, and like their prior history, but they really get started with Terry Bogard. Like there's like a BC and an AD or whatever that's measured in Terry Bogard units for them.
Yeah, BB and AB.
The common era.
Garo Densetsu.
And now somehow they're owned by the Kingdom of Saudi
let's just
Arabia.
put it out here. Be careful in terms of purchasing or supporting anything related to SNK or Neo Geo. They are currently owned by Prince Salman's MISK Foundation, but it's basically coincides with the Prince Mohammed bin Salman Foundation, supposedly nonprofit, but it supports Mohammed bin Salman. The Deep Listens Network supports journalism, and he's a murderer.
We support journalists not being cut up into pieces. Listen, I have been trying very hard to not just gush about how much I love the Neo Geo's entire thing, like aesthetic of big sprites and the very distinct synth sound its soundtracks have, but the company as it currently exists,
Well, it's funny. There's like, you could do something specifically about the downfall of SNK.
Piracy.
We don't. Well, not just piracy, like the market changed, and also the SNK Playmore.
And then they merged with Playmore.
No, Playmore was founded by the CEO jumping out of the company at last minute and founding Playmore based off of like bunk loans, and then buying the company after it filed for bankruptcy, so as that he can install himself and his friends as CEO. It's a huge history to SNK.
It's a very weird
history, but let's just say that financially the company's actually the healthiest it's been in literal 20 to 30
I
years.
hear
Because
KOF 15 is good.
And yeah, it's been disappointing because it's like everything they've said of Garu Mark of the Wolves 2 looks and is cool. I'm not going to support that game. I realize that we can get into the discussion
we can get into the ethics of no ethical consumption of capitalism.
Yeah.
But, when it's this easy and this straightforward, I personally, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You, the listener at home. But, this is one of those things where it's very easy to not do this because the ownership is so reprehensible.
Yeah. But anyways, other than that, like this game in particular, it's just kind of like a friendly reminder that the beginnings of SNK were not a given. And looking at it, like this game sold well immediately and then just completely tapered off almost after it released. So it apparently in Japan sold better than Columns. So its competition that month it came out in the 90s was a really bad puzzle game by
Columns
Sega.
Isn't that bad. I ain't no Columns fan.
Columns sucks. It's not cool. It's no
You
puzzle.
ever played
puzzle,
Hanagumi Tyson Columns for the Dreamcast? Anyway.
It's no Puyo Puyo.
I agree. Columns is fine. But yeah, this had a precipitous fall. SNK has done some wrap-ups or roll-ups of their stuff over the years on the Neo Geo. This never made any of those, and it's...
No, but it was released separately on the Switch.
Yes, it is. Hamster got their hands on this. So if you own a console that was made after 2013, there's a way for you to play this for $8, along with a surprising amount of the Neo Geo's library.
I would not recommend it.
I would not recommend $8 for a Switch port of this. Also, you could say a lot of things about Hamster. Workmanlike is the best way to describe Hamster.
They get it done.
Minimalist arcade ports.
I mean, it is the arcade ROM and a shell that they have used now hundreds of times, over and over and over again. So it is absolutely the game that it says on the tin.
They're basically the Japanese version of .emu.
That's not...
They get the job done.
Nah, .emu has done some solid arcade ports before.
That Wonder Boy conversion they did. I think they had a hand in that. I don't think they were the publisher of that, but I mean, that's a good... Them Wonder Boy games are good.
My only problem with .emu is like their insistence to make all of those shitty ass, bunk ass filters as a default, and their insistence that that's what people who want to play classic arcade games want. Scan lines, fake scan lines, awful. Get that shit off it. No, thank you. No fucking thank you.
You retro sickos being like, I want the best looking, most authentic scanline filter so it looks like it would in a CRT television. It's like, no, you're old. CRT televisions are dead. You don't know what the original looks like.
And you can actually look this up. One of my favorite recollections of .emu was they were coming around showing their 2017 port of Windjammers, and the guy's just gushing all of their filters and their scan lines to the Giant Bomb crew. And then Jeff's like, yeah, turn all that shit off. We want the original. And he's like, you sure? No, yeah, that I'm not a fan. Let's just play the game.
I like raw pixels.
Yeah, basically he's saying, yeah, just show us the raw pixels version.
Also, Windjammers 2, fantastic game.
I enjoyed it.
Deserves more credit.
I think it's time.
Yeah, let's rank this.
So, at the top, we've got Might and Magic 6, The Mandate of Heaven. So I think there's a compelling argument to be made here that the Super Spy is a superior dungeon crawling experience, and I'll tell you why. Might and Magic 6 has, as I recall, no one who says, and I quote, "Who is it? Dogs. Safe room card. Defeat Mura." So...
Who is it? Government dogs.
You are right. Might and Magic 6 does not have giant sprites. If we were ranking video games by the size of their sprites, it would be this. It would be the first Art of Fighting, I think. And then...
it'd be the boss sprite from Phantasy Star 2. That's so big you can't see the damage numbers pip off of it. And then Super Spy. And then Punch Out. And then every other game. This one's pretty bad. Yeah, this is probably in like the Revengers kind of Drakeny territory.
It's better than Tower of Druaga.
It's better than Tower.
It's better than Tower of Druaga. It has
How do we
big
feel about it
sprites
versus
and janky
GBA
translation.
Third Age though?
I think it's better than GBA Third Age because GBA Third Age is actually not as functional.
A non-entity of a video game.
Yeah, the whole like 3 lanes, send your guys down, and depending on where you place them, you get limited movement. Sucks.
This extremely limited tactics game that was made by like 4 people in 6 months.
Okay, that gets us up to Jade Empire.
I think this is below Jade Empire.
I would rather play Jade Empire because at least I can make fun of it for being
All right.
racist.
Well, that's 2 on 3, so we're decided. Democracy reigns. This is now above Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, which will make this, if I've got this corrected in my head, the new number on the list. I can't do math right now. It's going to scoot 1 down, and then it's going to go there. So it's going to be the new 24. It's going to be the new 23.
Cool.
I'm gonna edit that, and it's gonna sound correct. It's gonna be one of the numbers on the list. I'll tell you that much. Super Spy. It's a game that, as we said, if you buy it now, you'll be supporting actual terrorists.
You'll be supporting a futuristic city that is just a big nothing hole.
A line city
that no one lives in.
Just pixie
Neom.
dust and
It's the
rainbows
future.
going into that thing. Incredible. Okay, that's the arcade show.
Please look forward to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia buying like
another big developer,
the fucking Embracer Group or something.
Yeah, if they bought the Embracer Group, just like burn it all down to the ground and start over.
There's lots of stuff on itch that we'll just start playing, and to the exclusion of.
As long as they don't buy Falcom, we'll be fine. This podcast will be fine.
Don't put that evil on Falcom.
You breathed it into existence, Braden, and now I'm really scared.
It's okay. I don't think MBS is a big fan. Is a big
but
East
Falcom
head.
feels like the exact right scale of company to be worried about.
Oh no!
Anyway, I was gonna have a nice night, but I'm just gonna
shuffle
off this.
You can play East.
Maybe I will.
You can play Trails in the Sky.
Yo, I mean, not to like ducktail, but hearing Braden talk about how Yeast 1 is a 6-hour JRPG, guys.
I mean, I can talk about East 1 right now. We can just turn this podcast into East 1.
I haven't played it yet at all.
You hit the level cap halfway through the game, and so at some point, the only thing that affects your numbers is equipment.
That game rules.
Anyways, so the next podcast will be about our wrap-up of Arcanum. And then from there, anything fucking goes.
Yeah.
We're probably going to do some smaller roundups. This one.
I'm going to put both of these names out there. I'm going to say them both into a microphone. We're workshopping maybe some kind of Kuso roll-up, which the joke is, what have we been doing? The name Ku Solstice came out of my mouth, which I thought was really good. And I may just force us to stick with that. However, when I mentioned this to a friend that was over yesterday, they hit me with Jacques Cousteau, which might actually be better. So, if you have opinions on this very important decision we're going to make probably in the next couple of weeks.
Inquiries at
deep.lol. Get on that Discord. Slam that subscribe button. Ring that bell, etc. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Patreon.com/deeplistens is where you can send us a nice little tip to help us keep the mothership flying through space. Special thanks to SuperSex420 for providing us with the theme music called Halfway. This and other tracks by SuperSex420 are up on Bandcamp.com, which occasionally does those cheap weekends where they waive their fees, and I think one of them just ended. So you missed your shot, you sucker, but check him out. He's very decent. See you next time, and remember, there's no such thing as cheating in arcade games, probably. Just flick all them dip switches, baby. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of Off the Deep End was recorded and edited on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Nisqually or Nisqually people, who have lived on and stewarded these lands and waters since times immemorial.